Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about the pituitary gland, the hormones it secretes, and kind of the general effects that they're going to have. Okay, so the pituitary gland is kind of the first major endocrine hormone we're going to talk about. There are many hormones secreted by the pituitary gland, and it affects many other glands as well, and so we'll talk about that. So first of all, as kind of a reminder of where the pituitary gland is, all right, so it is on this picture, this kind of little pink bulb right there, right? So it's typically referred to as a pea on a stalk, all right? So if we look at it zoomed in here on the right, it is this kind of, so the pea here, and then the stalk here that connects it to the structure above. So above the pituitary gland is the hypothalamus, all right? So this is the hypothalamus. Really, all of this is hypothalamus, all right? And then it's connected, the hypothalamus, to the pituitary gland by this stalk. And that stalk is referred to as the infundibulum. So the infundibulum is the stalk. Wow, okay. Let me spell correctly. There we go. Okay. And so it's the stalk that connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. Okay. And so the hypothalamus controls in a lot of ways, and we'll see that, the activity and the release of hormones from the pituitary gland. Okay. So the hypothalamus up here is kind of like the control center for the pituitary gland down here. Okay, and so they are connected to each other. So first of all, let's kind of label the two parts of the pituitary gland. So we have the posterior pituitary, all right, that's going to be this side. So posterior is kind of back or behind the posterior pituitary. When you look at the histology in lab, it's going to be full of a lot of axons, so it's going to look very fibrous and very kind of fuzzy and hairy. That's because you have these neurons in the hypothalamus up here, all right? They're going to send axons down into that posterior pituitary. So the posterior pituitary, also sometimes called the neurohypophysis, there we go, is full of axons from the hypothalamus, all right? So that's why neuro, because it contains a lot of axons, and then hypophysis is kind of a term for pituitary, okay? So neurohypophysis contains a lot of axons from the hypothalamus. And so the way it's going to work in the posterior pituitary for the release of hormones is that these neurons in the hypothalamus here are going to make hormones, all right? They're going to manufacture hormones. They're going to send them down their axons to these axon terminals here, okay? So the hormones are going to be stored in the axon terminals here. All right, so we're going to have stored hormones in the axon terminals. All right, and so whenever that posterior pituitary needs to release a hormone, this neuron from the hypothalamus would just send an action potential down to that axon terminal, and then that would cause exocytosis of those stored hormones. And then they would go into these capillary beds you can see here, all right, so into the blood. So that's how the posterior pituitary works, all right? And then we have on the front, we have the anterior pituitary. So the anterior pituitary, its structure is going to look different from posterior because it is going to be full of these hormone secreting cells, all right? So a lot of endocrine cells, so all of these cells, endocrine cells, kind of mixed in with a bunch of capillaries. So it looks much more like a gland than the posterior pituitary does, okay? And so this anterior pituitary is connected to the hypothalamus by this kind of network of capillaries, all right? Well, so you have a network of capillaries in the anterior pituitary, and it's connected to the hypothalamus, whoops, switch to the pen, by this structure. So the hypophyseal portal vein, okay? And so this is a vein connecting the capillaries in the anterior pituitary to capillaries here, all right, where the neurons of the hypothalamus connect, okay? And so by definition, I'm gonna just write this off to the side here because we're gonna see this again. A portal vein is a vein between two capillaries, right? Between two capillary beds. All right, so between two capillary beds, okay? And so this is referred to as a portal vein because we have one capillary bed here with all these secretory cells in the anterior pituitary. Then we have one capillary here where these neurons from the hypothalamus can release their signaling kind of hormone here, okay? So there's going to be a hormone. These are called releasing hormones. So the hypothalamus, these neurons will produce releasing hormones, secrete them into this capillary bed. That releasing hormone will travel through the hypophyseal portal vein to these secretory cells and tell them to release, right? So the releasing hormone stimulates these cells of the anterior pituitary to make their hormones. Okay, so that's kind of the arrangement of the anterior pituitary. And so, again, like I said, the hypothalamus is kind of controlling, in a sense, the activity of both the anterior and the posterior pituitary. All right, so let's first talk about, we're going to talk about each of the hormones released. All right, but first let's talk about the posterior pituitary because it only releases two hormones. Okay, so those, remember, made by the neurons in the hypothalamus, stored in those axon terminals, and then released when there's an action potential. So there's only two hormones released that way. The first one is oxytocin, okay? And so oxytocin targets its target cell, so you should know the target cells for these hormones. Its target is going to be smooth muscle. Okay, and that's usually what I think of so I can kind of remember its function because it's going to be smooth muscle in either the uterus or in breast tissue. Okay, and so then the function of oxytocin is going to be that it causes uterine contraction during childbirth, all right? It's that positive feedback you probably learned about in A&P 2, okay? So uterine contraction. Okay, so that's one effect on the uterus it has. And so just a reminder of that positive feedback loop, right? During childbirth, the uterus, the baby starts to push on the cervix. That kind of stretching of the cervix triggers the posterior pituitary to release oxytocin. That oxytocin causes uterine contractions, which then causes more stretch on the cervix. Oxytocin will be released again, the uterus will contract more, and so on and so on. That's a positive feedback loop. Okay, so it acts on the uterus, causing that smooth muscle to contract. It also acts on breast tissue, and this is referred to as the letdown reflex. All right, and so this would just be the release of milk during breastfeeding. Okay, so when a baby starts to suckle, oxytocin is going to be released. That will go to the breast tissue, cause the smooth muscle to contract and release that milk from the breast tissue. And so this would be during breastfeeding. Okay, so that's the first hormone from the posterior pituitary. The second hormone is ADH, okay? And so this stands for anti-diuretic hormone. And that's kind of how I remember what it does, right? Knowing what those words mean. Those words are, right, what the letters stand for, kind of helps me remember what it does, okay? And so the job of antidiuretic hormone, ADH, is to maintain water homeostasis in the body, all right? So water homeostasis, okay? And so it does that. And so the reason the name kind of tells me that is that diuretic, right, means, so diuresis is the production of urine. So what this hormone is going to do is it's going to decrease urine production, okay? And so by the reason it's going to do that is to kind of put water back into the blood. So it takes it from the urine, puts it into the blood, so you have a decreased urine production. And so obviously, again, we're going to talk about this hormone, and this is going to be true with many hormones we'll talk about it again when we get to the urinary system, all right? But we're going to talk about it kind of an overview here, and then we'll do much more detail when we get to the urinary system. So the target of ADH is the kidneys. All right, so that's why I have a little kidney here. Okay, so it targets the kidneys, all right, where the urine is being made. And so if there are receptors, there are neurons in the hypothalamus that detect how salty the blood is. If they detect that it's really salty, meaning that you're dehydrated, and the blood is too concentrated, this hormone will be released. It will go to the kidney, all right? And in the kidney, aquaporins are added to the tubules, right, in the kidneys, all right? So this allows, we're just going to keep it simple here. We'll talk about, again, in much more detail when we do the urinary system, right? But it allows H2O to be, we'll just say, moved from the urine to the blood. All right. And so then we're going to have a decreased urine production, but we're going to kind of restore that water balance in the blood. And so that's the job of ADH. Okay, ADH and oxytocin. All right, so that is the posterior pituitary, just the two hormones. For the anterior pituitary, obviously, as you can see, there's a lot more going on. And so the anterior pituitary, or the adenohypophysis, right? So the posterior is called the neurohypophysis. The anterior is called the adenohypophysis. Adeno just referring to its kind of glandular structure. Okay, and so there are hormones that just act like, normal hormones. They go to their tissue, have their effect, like oxytocin and ADH did. Those are going to be our growth hormone and prolactin that we'll talk about. However, from the anterior pituitary, there's another major category of hormones, and those are called tropic hormones. All right, so tropic hormones. And so by definition, I'm going to write it up here where I have a little space. A tropic hormone, and this is really important to understand, a tropic hormone is a hormone that acts on another gland, okay? So this is a hormone that, instead of going and causing an effect on a tissue, it causes another gland to secrete. Generally, it's going to be another hormone, all right? So it acts on another gland. Okay, that is a tropic hormone. Okay, and so in the anterior pituitary, we're going to have 4 tropic hormones. So TSH, ACTH, FSH, and LH, which we'll kind of talk about in a little detail what they do. And then we have our growth hormone and prolactin that are not tropic hormones. Okay, so what I want to do is go through the tropic hormones and how they act. And then in the next video, we'll pick up where we left off with talking about growth hormone and prolactin. And then we'll move on to some other endocrine organs. Okay, so with tropic hormones, they are typically going to act through something called the hypothalamic hypophyseal axis. All right, so you're going to need to understand that. Before we go into that, I want to kind of just define these, and we'll kind of put this in the little blanks here. So define what these abbreviations are. All right, so for TSH, this is going to be thyroid stimulating hormone. All right, it's kind of like with our ADH, I think knowing what the letters stand for tell you what they do. So if you think about it, likely this hormone is going to go to the thyroid gland, right? Thyroid stimulating hormone. ACTH is adrenocorticotropic hormone. It's a long one. All right, so adrenocorticotropic hormone. Okay, and so it goes to the adrenal cortex, right? So adrenocortico refers to the adrenal cortex, which is where it goes. And it causes the release, stimulates the adrenal cortex to release cortisol. Okay, and then FSH would be follicle stimulating hormone, and it is going to act on the ovaries and the testes. And then also LH is luteinizing hormone, and that is also going to act on the ovaries and the testes. Okay, so those are the names of the hormones. Let's talk about that hypothalamic hypophyseal axis and kind of how it works. All right, and so what we'll do first is talk about it in kind of an overview form, and then we'll go and talk about in detail for each hormone and its hypophyseal hypothalamic hypophyseal axis, which I'll end up abbreviating HHA because that is a mouthful and it is a lot to write. Okay, so the way that this axis works is that the hypothalamus, right? So we're going to start with the hypothalamus. And so remember that hypothalamus, if we look back up at our picture, right, it's connected to, so we have our neurons from our hypothalamus here. They send axons down. I said they release a releasing hormone into this capillary. It travels through that hypophyseal portal vein to the anterior pituitary and stimulates these cells. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. So the hypothalamus, then, so it releases or secretes a releasing hormone. All right, onto the anterior pituitary. As a result, the anterior pituitary is going to secrete its tropic hormone. That is going to go act on whatever gland it's specific for and cause that gland to secrete its hormone. Okay, and so then that hormone is going to feed back to the hypothalamus. All right, so this will be negative feedback. Depending on what the hormone is, it'll depend on what that feedback is. All right, so when the levels of that hormone are really low, it'll feed back onto the hypothalamus saying we need more of that hormone. or if the levels are going to be really high of that hormone, it'll feed back, and that hypothalamus can stop, secreting that releasing hormone. Okay, so let's go through our specific examples, starting with thyroid stimulating hormone, so TSH, all right? So the hypothalamus is going to secrete its releasing hormone. It is called thyroid releasing hormone. All right, that's released, secreted by the hypothalamus, travels through that hypophyseal portal vein to the anterior pituitary. Then that anterior pituitary is going to secrete the TSH, that thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone is going to go to the thyroid gland, where the thyroid gland is going to secrete T3 and T4, which are just the thyroid hormones. Okay? And so then when thyroid hormone levels are low, all right, so when these levels are low, that is going to send feedback to the hypothalamus, and that feedback is going to stimulate, all right? So this is going to be a stimulating feedback to the hypothalamus saying, we don't have enough thyroid hormone, and so you need to secrete more releasing hormone, so there's more TSH, so then there's more thyroid hormone. Okay, and so then if levels are high, all right, then that is going to feed back to the hypothalamus, and it is going to inhibit the hypothalamus. All right, it's going to say we don't need more thyroid hormone. You can stop secreting that releasing hormone, and so on. Okay, so that's our negative feedback. All right, and so that's the thyroid stimulating hormone. So we have thyroid stimulating hormone, thyroid releasing hormone comes from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary releases thyroid stimulating hormone. It acts on the thyroid gland to cause it to produce thyroid hormone. Okay. Our next one is ACTH. All right. So ACTH, the releasing hormone, is corticotropin releasing hormone. Corticotropin releasing hormone. All right, so that is going to be secreted by the hypothalamus. It is going to act on the anterior pituitary, causing that anterior pituitary to secrete ACTH. That ACTH is then going to go to the adrenal cortex and tell the adrenal cortex to make cortisol. And so we'll talk about cortisol a little later in this chapter. It's a hormone for managing long-term stress. All right, and so if there is a decrease in cortisol, right, or the body is experiencing some kind of stress, or there's a stressor, like maybe a fever or something like that, some sort of stressor on the body, that is going to stimulate, all right, the hypothalamus to secrete more releasing hormone so that there's going to be more cortisol. If cortisol levels are high, all right, and there's no, new stressors or anything like that, that is going to inhibit. All right, so that will inhibit the hypothalamus. Okay, so hopefully you're kind of getting the vibe for how this is working, all right? So it's, kind of a consistent thing for these different hormones. All right, so for FSH and LH, I put these together because they have the same releasing hormone and then they're acting on the same glandular tissues. So with FSH and LH, the hypothalamus is going to release gonadotropin releasing hormone. All right, that is going to go to the anterior pituitary, cause the secretion of FSH, LH, So follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, those are going to go to the ovaries or the testes depending on the individual, and that will stimulate secretion of estrogen, also progesterone, all right, in females, and then testosterone in males, okay? And so then when levels are low, we would get that stimulating production by the hypothalamus. And then again, just like we've been talking about, if levels are high, that would tell the hypothalamus, you can chill out, right? We don't need any more of your releasing hormone, and it'll inhibit it. Okay? All right, good. So I think that's enough for this video, all right? So you can kind of digest that process, you know, the kind of concept of this axis, the hypothalamic hypophyseal axis, and how it works, all right? And so then we'll pick up on those last two hormones for the anterior pituitary, growth hormone and prolactin, and then we'll move on to a few other endocrine organs, endocrine glands in the next video.